So welcome back to the Philanthropy Mastermind series. Of course, I'm your host, Jay Frost, and we are so appreciative of the fact that DonorSearch lets us have these sessions with leaders in the field, and we've been doing that since 2016. But not until today have we had a chance to talk to a person who really is at the forefront, the tip of the spear, pick your analogy, for tech in the third sector globally. And that is Amy Sample Ward, who is kind enough to talk with us today. This is a recorded session, but we're going to be distributing it while I'm flying around the world, and while she's off on another adventure, you'll be hearing all about in a minute. And hopefully, as we're talking, we won't have a terrible crash in the background, because I think both of us in our respective neighborhoods have people working on roofs. So as long as we're fine there, we will jump in and talk with Amy about their work, and when it comes to, of course, N10 and more broadly, the third sector. So, Amy, you are, of course, the Chief Executive Officer of N10. Can you talk a bit more about N10 for those who don't know it?
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I keep thinking, I just don't have the Zoom, videos on to see everybody. And I'm trying to remember that folks are listening to us. So I see you out there in the world. For those who I haven't met, I'm Amy Sample Ward. I use they, them. I'm the CEO of N10, as Jay just said. And I'm really excited for where this conversation is going to go. I will start with your first question, making sure everyone knows who N10 is. We're a nonprofit organization focused on making sure that other nonprofits and missions and movements all around the world are successful, that we change this world, and that we can do that with skillful and strategic and equitable technology use. N10 as an organization doesn't recommend specific technologies. We don't sell you specific technologies. We don't give you certain technologies. Instead, we're focused on making sure everybody that's trying to use technology or make decisions about technology or data or anything else knows how to make those decisions, knows how to budget for technology, knows what it means to use a certain tool and store data from your community in that tool, and how do we navigate what all of that means for our missions and for our communities, and how do we navigate together creating a world from the tools we have today.
Can you take us a bit far back, Amy, to N10's creation for context?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I love starting there, because unlike a lot of nonprofits who have a founder who either had a personal experience in their family or their life, or learned about an issue, and started an organization, N10 was formed by hundreds of people who are still in the community today. Back in the late 90s, there were folks who saw technology and knew that it could be something better utilized for social change work, whether that was nonprofits or community-based groups or whatever it might be. But of course, back in the late 90s, not everyone in an organization even had a computer at work, and those folks tried to self-organize, which is a powerful tool we have as people, but also is very difficult to sustain. So hundreds of community members started to self-organize, would come together for events, really just to share knowledge, and things they were working on back then, just to illustrate the amount that the community in the world has changed in 23 years, was what's the best practice for setting up a Wi-Fi network for an organization, right? Or what's the change management process for getting folks to use a computer, right? And swap those examples, share templates with each other, et cetera. And after a few years of doing so, really admitted that it was difficult to self-organize. There was no one holding the resource of and the responsibility of doing that organizing. And so they took a vote at one of their community events. If you're in the room, you get a vote. And the majority of votes were, we need an organization to sustain this work. And that's how N10 was formed. And I'm so excited that, like I said, hundreds of those folks are still in the community to this day, still sharing things that they're learning and supporting so many other folks doing the same.
What about for yourself, though? When you entered that community, how far back does that go?
Well, I was in high school when N10 was formed. But it wasn't too long after that, because I have always worked in nonprofit organizations with technology. So I joined as a member, like so many folks, and even so many staff were members of N10 First. And when I joined, I was working at a large private foundation, and I was the staff person who was hired to do two things. The foundation was the lead investor in a couple open source projects, which, of course, if you're the lead investor, you kind of dictate the roadmap, which is something, I have opinions about. But but that meant I was like the kind of key liaison with those open source development teams. And then the other part of my work this was back in 2006, 2007, when nonprofits were applying for grants to learn how to use Facebook or to learn how to use social media tools. And the foundation, of course, wanted them to have not a $1,000 grant to learn to use Facebook, but a, $100,000 grant to go do their work. And so the other half of my job was providing social media training to nonprofits for free, so that they didn't have to, kind of like waste their grant of the year on that. And I would give them that for free. So I did social media training and open source development support, and found N10, immediately found so many folks who understood that feeling of being the only one in a staff meeting who knew what you were talking about, And yeah, I just got so involved and, came to the conference, joined webinars, presented webinars, started the tech club, just dove right into the community. And even though I continued to have other jobs before I ended up working at N10, I never left the community. It just felt like the place where, where I could be with everyone.
I'm just thinking about how much has changed, but how much has stayed the same. Even when you talked about setting up a Wi-Fi network, or any of the issues that are being discussed right now, social media training is a great example of this. It's still going on. There are people releasing books this month, ebooks now, that are all about how to utilize social media. But I wonder if they're really scratching the surface when it gets outside the world of N10, where you really dig into these issues.
Right. Well, and it's interesting that they're the same, but they're different, right? Like, I think back then, a lot of the conversations were these social networks have a core set of users that probably aren't you as the organization staff or the folks that you're trying to engage with. And as Facebook transitioned from, college students to the general public, or Twitter went from like very tech community into the general public, et cetera. And now it's like, how do you navigate the maybe moral positioning of certain tools? How do you navigate your folks have left these tools, but not everyone has left, and do you stay, right? So they're the same buckets, but the questions inside them are different. Even the Wi-Fi network, I think about when the pandemic first started, March 2020, immediately, of course, everyone is shifted, into a different way of working, but nonprofits were also shifted immediately into massive amounts of need for their services, right? So many people out of jobs, so many kids out of school, so just so much need that accelerated. And we were getting calls from organizations all over the US, all over the world. And the questions were things like, are we allowed to let our staff use their phones? And yeah. I was just like, allowed by who? Who is allowing or not allowing them to use the phone at home, And they were like, oh, I don't know who. You tell me who. And I was like, no, you are, it's your own, employee handbook or your own like organizational tech policies. Like, are you going to compensate them if they're using their own phone? Are you giving them a stipend? Are you buying them a phone? Are you paying for their home internet? And it just immediately, so many organizations, like, we've never thought of this. We've never thought about whether or how much or how we would pay for people's home internet, or if they would get phones from us, or why would we get them a phone? They already have a phone. Well, if you work in, maybe social services, and they're doing client, interactions on their phone, that's now their phone, and you could just see the unraveling, like, on top of all the other stress of, as individuals navigating the pandemic, right? Instantly naming all of these things that if you were in a calm, non-emergency situation, I'm sure a lot of organizations would want really thoughtful conversations to come up with what their policies are and what are the right policies for their teams. And in that moment, instead, it was just, you could see people on the video just like crumbling, like, how do I make all of these decisions? And we've never, ever thought of this. Just like, one of the service projects that NTEN had at the NTC years ago in the early 2000s was going into larger homeless shelters, whether day shelters, overnight shelters, and installing Wi-Fi networks so that there could be internet there.
Oh,
and similarly saying, okay, this is, if we're putting in this network, is it password protected? Is it open? Is it, here are all of these implications, and folks being like, I just thought there would be a Wi-Fi, and now I don't know how to think about these questions,
Right.
Which, again, that's what NTEN does, is like, there are very few things where there's probably one answer, right? And technology and its use and its policies in your work don't have one answer. And it's about learning how to come up with those answers that are right for you and your community. And how do you engage in those conversations, and how do you have different considerations that are mission aligned? How do you include your community? But so much has changed in 23 years, and here we still are.
Here we still are, but you're coming up with sets, you meaning NTEN, are coming up with questions that help organizations define things to themselves. It's so fascinating on so many levels, because I know that when people join an organization, and they probably expect to be educated in something. Like, here's a set of rules.
People want we get so many folks who say, well, I found out today that I'm in charge of the website redesign. I would like to know what that is. Like, well, that could be, hundreds of things. What website do you have now? Or is it just the design that's being redesigned? Is it the whole system? Is it integrated with your database? Again, right? The crumbling of all the layers, that they're just not simple questions,
No, they're not simple questions, but there are all these moral hazards in the decisions that they eventually choose to make. It's pretty empowering that you leaned in to the questions as a mechanism for organizing that discussion with individual members, participants, within NTC, all of that. But I can imagine that it also, you must sometimes watch as organizations then implement without putting up guardrails in certain things. And Twitter is an example of this, but we can probably get into that. But
yes.
What are your thoughts as far as organizations then finding answers that sometimes they wouldn't be the answers that you would necessarily endorse, or that NTEN?
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I don't think that everyone's going to make the choices I make in my life. And so in the same way, I don't think that our organization will make the same choices as every other organization. However, what's important to me is that people know why they made that choice, and that those reasons or whatever are really centering their community and not obligation that isn't ours to try to feel obligated to, or perception issue or something else, right? I think that as organizations, especially the more quote unquote successful we get, the more pressure we feel to do things in ways that maybe aren't what we want to do just for ourselves, because the idea of what we think funders might like us to be doing or to be seen as doing or anything else. And I'm not saying that, again, that that's simple or easy or there is one answer, but I do want folks to feel like you made a choice in maybe 2010 to join Twitter. It's now 2023. You know, what was a decision that was right for you at a certain moment, a moment later can be a different answer. That's true of technology. It's also true of life, right? But I think that organizations often don't have an actual system, like an established process to reevaluate decisions. And so without a process inside of an organization, it can be seen as like, well, this is Jay's issue and not, hey, this is the process, the system that is bigger than Jay or than Amy says, this is when we reevaluate our communication channels for the year or something, right? Because without something bigger than us, it turns into, everyone in the organization is annoyed that Jay wants to have this conversation again, right? And so it's not going to go anywhere because it's already set up to fail. Mm-hmm. And so that's often why we talk about process so much at N10 and not the technology, because without processes around it, we don't set ourselves up to really have, conversation or evaluation or choices, et cetera. So yes, I do think that organizations will make different choices. And my hope is that there are mechanisms that organizations have where they're hearing from their community to say, maybe it is time for us to reevaluate this, whether it's a social media choice or anything else, that really that prompt from the community is truly a prompt for the organization to reconsider things.
Talking about that a little bit, there are many organizations that started to use a set of tools and they didn't codify that process. Right. There's no document somewhere that says this is why we chose to do this on September whatever of 19 whatever. And social media is a great example of this. There was a lot of pressure to suddenly adopt and you were training people on proper use way back in the day. Right. Still, that's going on today. Do we spend more time on Instagram and less on something else? And I often don't see a document that says, this is how we chose to do what we do, and this is the set of events under which we might choose to adapt or change that process.
It's funny, even back in 2007, I would say in my training workshops, there's no award waiting for them. I will talk to you about how to make these decisions, about how to know if it's right for your community, but I'm not saying that any of you in this room even need to use it ever, let alone use it today, let alone use it as fast as you possibly can, right? There's no award there. And I think that there has been that, oh my gosh, we have to hurry, be the first to put your profile everywhere as soon as something pops up. And I'm glad that I'm not the only voice who told people, you don't need to hurry. I don't know that it was the majority of voices saying that, though. I often felt a little bit alone in telling people, there's no rush, and there was a document I made it as a Google spreadsheet that, anyone could duplicate, that I use in my workshops that helped you map and decide, okay, which platforms are we going to talk to which people in our community on, and to document, okay, this is when we're now using this, right? It is still, however many is 2023 minus 2006, however many years later, I still get notifications that someone is requesting to view that document. And I'm like, you can totally view it. It's already viewable, but I guess the emerging theme of this conversation is look how far we've come and here we are, right? we're still, or maybe the theme is I made an incredible template all those years ago and it cannot be beat. It has withstood the test of time. Well, it is still the best community map template there is. Yeah.
And because it is a Google sheet, right? I mean, it has been adapted. It's not like you wrote it once. It's not the 10 Commandments. So you're okay. It's not in stone. But you've been public, N10 has been public about this Twitter decision, but many people may not have heard about it. Would you talk a little bit about the decision you made and why it's important to N10, what it says?
Yeah. We had been public about de-investing from Facebook years before. And then and for us, that meant not putting money into Facebook. So back in 2020, not buying boosts on ads or posts, not buying ads, etc. And then just not posting at all, not spending staff time as a resource there either. And we didn't remove the page. We left it there saying, okay, here's like how to find us. Here's our website, all of those pieces. And then joined with other organizations in the Stop Hate campaign and trying to get others to understand the implications of using the platform. And so we do have a process internally to evaluate, where we're spending money. And for us, that's actual dollars. That's Google ad grants, that is dollars, but it's not out of our budget, and staff time. And as the sale of Twitter moved forward, we were evaluating that internally. And at first thought, okay, well, like I think many people, what impact will it really have? And then very quickly, it was clear that there was impact, right? And this was not just the changing of hands at the top and Twitter was the same. This was going to make some real impacts. And I think for us, safety is elusive, of course, on the internet, but is also real and specific for certain communities. And it felt like the platform is not prioritizing safety when it's removing the teams that support that work, right? When the staff, the entire departments are being removed that would really make this a tool that can even function. This doesn't feel good. And so we similarly de-invested. We stopped running any ads. We removed any financial contributions and then stopped posting. We left our account, so that we could get notified. We have a surprising number of people who what we consider to be customer service questions come in through Twitter, where people are, saying, I think because they know that we're responsive and we're online all the time. So people will DM us and say, did I renew my membership? Or, so we left our account so we could still get notifications, but it just didn't feel like a place that aligned with, how we are trying to make these decisions and navigate the web as an organization. And we have said from the beginning in both of those changes, we know how privileged as an organization we are to be able to say, we're walking away. There are a lot of organizations who provide different types of services than N10 does and provide them to very different people than N10 does. And that's why we're not trying to say everyone should make the choices N10 makes. We want everyone to make choices for real, to have it be a choice, to know why you are staying there, to be intentional about how you're using those platforms, right? I often talk to organizations who are providing incredibly necessary services, and they say, that's why we're still on Facebook. This is where folks that need our services go online to talk to their family, so they will find us here. So it's, important to remember the duty you have to that community and these tools, right? Don't on Facebook post an event for pro bono immigration legal services and ask people to RSVP to the event. Do not create that data trail for them, right? Close the RSVPs, post that it's happening, put the address in and leave it at that, right? Don't count your metrics of how many people RSVP'd and whatever. Don't even let them. Don't harm them in that way, right? If you're on Twitter, post things that you expect people to read, but not to retweet. Because at this point, being actively retweeting something that says, here's how to cross a border and get an abortion is not helpful, right? It is going to create a data trail that's harmful to them as an individual. So if you're using these tools and you're providing services or information that is needed and is important to be in those platforms, do it with care, that you're not adding to someone else's data trail that makes them even more vulnerable.
When you talk with people about this, do you find that they are very aware of these data trails and potential harms from platforms like these?
No, because I think it's hard to see from a user's perspective that that data trail is there for you. And as an organization, you don't have access to all that data. So it's hard to remember as an organization that Facebook could see all of that, right? Or Twitter could see all of that, even though you just see, oh, these are the 10 people who liked my post or something, right? But because you don't see it doesn't mean the data trail isn't there. I do appreciate that it's hard to remember that and hard to know how these, I mean, they're intentionally obfuscating all of it from us. So it isn't your fault that you don't know it, but you don't have to know exactly how the algorithm works to know how to keep folks safe, right? And I don't want folks to feel like it's too overwhelming to know what's going on. So it's not worth trying to make decisions about that. If you can remove the ins and outs of how the tool works from, well, I know what will keep people safe, and that's that they don't have to be associated with my posts, or they don't have to, RSVP, or they don't have to whatever, that's enough to make better decisions.
And before we move on to another subject, I want to find out whether or not those who have not been involved in N10 and following this work and the rationale for these decisions, if there's somewhere within the N10 environment on the web where they can go and see how you have come to these conclusions as an organization, so that when they have an internal discussion, and maybe it's between a person who says, well, I use Facebook to talk to my family, so why shouldn't we be using it to talk to the public? They don't see the risk, and so it becomes a source of some kind of friction internally, perhaps just because people haven't thought through this. Yeah. Is there a place where they can turn to get information to help facilitate an intelligent, process-oriented conversation?
Yeah, totally. I think we have blog posts to document our own piece that has highlighted what we've, kind of like what I've just talked through. But I would honestly say the best place would be to go to some of our online groups, which totally free. You just have to have an account so that you can log into them, and ask there, because there are a lot of different folks who've ended up having very different conversations to come to different conclusions. And so it could be helpful if you're that person who's saying, well, how do I get my organization to talk about this? Or I feel like there's concerns, but my organization doesn't. You will be amongst friends in those online groups, and share a little bit about your context, because I can also see organizations who've come at it from a mission side versus organizations who've come at it from more of an ethics side, and yeah, we welcome wherever you're at in that conversation. But I think posting in the online community means you could then be in conversation with even more folks than just me.
Right. And those communities, again, are the things that were so effective 20, 30 years ago are really effective today. They just look a little different, and the technology behind it's a little different, but very important, these groups. I wanted to see if we can move on to something that is related. And sets the stage for discussion about where things are going, especially today and in the future with AI, where I'm sure the same kinds of discussions are really relevant, because 100%. It's moving so quickly. It's moving even faster, at least in my experience, faster than it did with the adoption of the web, the adoption of email, the adoption of social media sites. This is moving like a rocket. And you have spent a fair amount of time personally delving into these issues about technology. You're an author on the subject. Is the Tech That Comes Next, is that the most recent?
Yes.
Book? Okay. And when was that released, by the way?
Just last year.
Just last year. And so for that book, I know you're starting to make sure that people have a framework for these discussions. Can you talk a bit about that book, first of all, for those who are unfamiliar?
Totally. So The Tech That Comes Next was co-written with my wonderful friend, Afua Bruce. And you can go to thetechthatcomesnext.com, and we have links for all different, whatever site you like to buy your books from. The links are all there. The place that we start that book from, well, I should say to begin with, there's no answers in there. So good luck. There's no answers to any of this. But the place where we start the book, we tried to take as a model for how we want folks to have these conversations in. And we do mean conversations today about the tools you're using today, but we also mean the conversations where you're sitting together and saying, what is even possible? Is this it? Right? Because we say, this is not it. This isn't it at all, right? If this was what it took to have an equitable world, we would have an equitable world, and we do not have one, which means we don't yet have the tools that will be the tools we have then, right? And instead of talking about, what's the technology we need, we started by saying, what are we actually valuing? And if we can be really explicit with each other and agree with each other on what we're valuing, it will shift how we develop technology and also how we use it and to what end it gets put to use. Because right now, there's a lot of examples of technology that we maybe have already discussed that folks are using, and they have very different values than the values that were built with in mind, right? And we can see what happens when we do that, right? There is a real issue with how folks are trying to use a tool with what it was built on. So in the book, we start, and we're not assuming that these are the only values that exist, but we offer 6 that we think are kind of the foundation, and we could, maybe agree together to build even more values into our system. But just really quickly as an example, so the first is that we value lived experience and knowledge. So we're not saying that only certain people can build technology, right? That all of us have something to contribute when we're thinking about what to build and how to use it and what we need and where we're going. All of us have something to contribute there. And the experiences we've had as humans that are alive today is all that qualifies us, right? To be part of that. That we need to value a diversity of people in a diversity of pieces of the process. So, organizations are not doing something as a small team and then at the end, unveiling it to the community and saying, here it is, like, we built this for you. Of course, what's the community's response supposed to be other than like, no thanks, right? If they weren't ever included, why would they be excited to have it unveiled at the end, right? So really valuing that all of those folks, community should be part of the process from the beginning, valuing accessibility, and not only accessibility and like the web standards type of accessibility, but how do we have these conversations? Are we using a bunch of jargon so that our community intentionally doesn't know what we're talking about? Or are we changing our language to really be inclusive? Are we having these conversations when the community could show up and be part of them? Is there food? Is there childcare? Like, what are all of these pieces that make it so that everyone can participate, and how do we operate that way? So that's just an example, but when we think about what we value and who we value, and then we start to talk about technology on top of that, you can already see, even just from those first 3 values, how different the conversation of technology becomes. And I think in doing that, we set ourselves up to say, well, then what are the pieces we all bring to the table? I often use this analogy that if we could just imagine that everyone is like, actually, well, we are people, but in this idea, like there's people standing around a table and we're like, okay, we have to build something, like empty your pockets. If we are together, we have what we need. We should be able to empty our pockets, and whatever's there, we can build with, right? And if we don't have something, it means somebody wasn't at the table with us. We were not actually all together, And so if we're thinking about that, what's coming out of all of our pockets, we know that at least in the world we have today, there are nonprofit social impact organizations, community-based organizations, right? They come with certain resources. There's funders, VCs, investors, et cetera. They come with certain resources. There's policymakers of all different, types and levels. There's technologists. There's also communities. And so if all of those 5 groups, which also overlap, right? I'm in a number of communities. I'm a technologist. I'm also a policymaker, but I'm also a, nonprofit staff person. Like, we know that each of us often overlap across those 5, but if we have all of those 5 at the table and we empty our pockets, we have what we need. We actually can build something different, It's just a matter of shifting the conversation to be about what is this big dream of an equitable world, and let's build from our values instead of, another solution that is sold to us.
There's so much to unpack there that's really fascinating, and a couple of the elements are, for me, first of all, use the word equity, but I think you only used it once in that, but it is core, right,
Yes,
to much of what you're discussing. And you also talked about language, the language we use to describe these things in a way that is not only inclusive, meaning that the people, the way I'm using it, that the people who haven't been a part of the conversation about how things are designed and implemented and distributed, that they are a part of it. But
yeah,
inclusivity also means like all the different people who haven't been talking together. Some
yeah,
have varying levels of power, but they're often not in the same space. They aren't pulling the stuff out of their pockets
right,
together.
right,
Just so that everybody can hear it,
yeah.
you talk about why you think equity is important and why it's important also from a practical perspective for those who need funds for the work they do.
Yeah. I really appreciate you drawing in on that. And at N10, we have I think there's all different acronym lists and everything else, but at N10, we talk specifically about equity and liberation, because equity is not equal, right? It does not mean that we think every single person has, the same A, B, C, D, and F. It means people have what they need in the way that they need it, right? And that we are all free, like truly free. What is that world, right? And something that we talk a lot about at N10 is like, there's not collective liberation island that some people get to go to first. It doesn't work that way. We all get there or none of us get there, And when we think about it that way, it, I think, makes it easier to think about equity not being equal, that it not being, okay, Jay has exactly the same things I need because I have different needs. I'm a different human, right? I have different health needs, different likes and dislikes, different, whatevers. But I want you to have what you need in the way that you need it, so that I can have what I need in the way that I need it, and that we can all get there to that place. And I think when we're thinking about technology and we really bring that thinking with us, we realize, of course, no technology would be the thing every single person would use. There's no way that, just like you have different health needs and different favorite foods, there's no way, right, that one tool would be what everyone needs. So of course there's going to be difference. That is a direct kind of contrast to the way technology is marketed to us, right? These are like the solutions that everyone needs, and we want this, and don't you need this? Maybe you don't, right? And what is a world where we can accept in that equitable world that you're going to have different technology needs and wants than I'm going to have? We're always going to need to build more than one thing. We're always going to need to find success, not by how many people adopted that tool, but did the right people who needed that tool adopt it? Was it affordable and accessible and available to them? Does it work for them? Great, we're done, right? Not that it has to, quote unquote, scale forever. That's not the way that technology, if it's accountable to us, needs to work. But of course, we're often dealing with technology that's not accountable to us, that's accountable to investors or shareholders, or even just this myth that technology should scale forever and that everyone should use it and that everyone will ever be on a single platform. So,
and so when it then comes to this issue about internally, sort of like that social media discussion, well, we're on Facebook already, why wouldn't we be here? When it comes to funding, people will say, well, okay, I understand equity is a discussion, but what I'm focused on right here is just bringing in the money so we can deliver that whatever it is. So how can you help people to make that leap so they see, yes, by having a vision that is equity informed, that's probably the wrong phrase, but is informed by that belief system, that we can also raise probably the same or more money in order to deliver services to everyone who might need them in the ways that they need them.
Right, exactly. I think, when we're talking about equity in that way, we're talking both about equity internally as an organization. Is it equitable? Are staff positioned to do equitable work, and are they being treated equitably? As well as, are we doing our work in a way that is allowing us to be part of creating equity in our community? Obviously a single organization is not going to be the one that changes the whole world, but if each of us are extending equitable outcomes to those that we work with, that patchwork starts to fill in, right? And makes it easier to work together and build power together and influence the systems. I do think there's this idea that fundraising especially is separate from the organization's efforts around whether it's equity or any other values pieces, because, I see organizations say, well, like, capitalism is flawed or fundraising is flawed, but it's over here. And, it's the thing that allows us to do the good work over here. But, I think we all have to question what that means as an organization, and how can we make sure that we're doing good work that's fueling good work, right? And how do we, that's not to say turn down all of the money. Like, I know that you need money, NTEN needs money, like that's just part of the broken system, right? But how do we make that in a way where we could say, okay, but if you are the donor, you don't get to decide how we run our programs. Our community decides how we run our programs, right? And thank you so much for fueling them. Or if you are the donor, you don't get to decide, what our mission is, or what our directives are, or what our roadmap is. That's decided in these processes. And you don't have to be excluded from them. Again, right? If we're all emptying our pockets on the table, join us at the table where you can hear from all these different people that are also here, and know that your funding was one important piece, but if there's no participants, it doesn't matter that you funded it, right? So it kind of helps put those things in check and say, actually, that's one of multiple resources we need for our mission to happen. Thank you, but it's no more or less important than these other pieces. And I think actually inviting people in, whether it's a physical table, not that they have to empty their pockets when they get there, but, I think doing that helps create an actual lived context where people can see, oh, yes, we are all in this together. And that forces conversations around equity where it's not about this is more important than this, but it takes all of this to make our mission possible,
As you said that, I had this image in my mind from Apollo 13, where they have to fix the rocket or the ship, or else they're all going to die. And so they have to bring all the tools that they know are on the ship, every single one, even if it looks like they're unrelated to the task at hand, and they have to find a way, bringing all the minds together, the minds that were working on NASA at that time, to solve that problem. But we don't do that in the nonprofit sector very often. And it's that you're making this brilliant argument for it. It is helpful that you've also just described how, at least the way I'm hearing you, that it's possible to bring everybody to the table, regardless of the power, real or perceived, that they might have, and entertain the resources they real or perceived that they might have, that it's not all or nothing for one person or another. It's everybody, or we all lose.
Right.
And I know that we started this part of the conversation talking about the book and also alluding to AI. I'm wondering if you see a through line here when people then are thinking about AI, because it seems like there's going to be a number of decisions made, and one, of course, is about the tech itself. And one inclination is to do what you said a minute ago, which is just, oh, it's there, we better eat it up fast. It's sort of like the all-you-can-eat buffet, but without thinking about the potential risks of what's in the bins. The other one is the aspect of process that you've been talking about. But another one has to do with who's making those decisions. And that's what you've just been sharing. Can you take us through how you're thinking about AI now through the intent lens, your own personal lens, and what advice, if any, you might have, at least in the form of questions for nonprofits that are thinking about these issues.
Yes, thank you for saying questions. So the last maybe piece I'll say about the book is that it is sectioned into those 5 groups: social impact organizations, technologists, funders, et cetera. And every section ends with 25 questions, so that it's not, here's our 25 recommendations, it's 25 questions. So if you're in a room and you are yourself a nonprofit staff person and you happen to be sitting with a funder, here are questions we've already pre-written that you can just say, hey, how do you feel about this? And it forces the conversations into these directions. Good luck. Let us know how the questions go. But there's 25 in every chapter, so they're related to the role. So you can kind of orient based on who you're talking to. So yes, more questions to come. We talk about AI in the book because it is such a big shifting topic right now. And one of NTEN's programs is an annual conference, the Nonprofit Technology Conference, and that just happened in April of this year. And that was, of course, a big, area of conversation at the conference. There were both exhibitors and, folks there who were like, we have AI for you. And then attendees, with every kind of opinion on the spectrum, from like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to use it, to like, never, don't touch me with that, But I think that, like any other technology, at least any other technology that we have right now in the world, there can be places where it can be used because it is what it's meant to do. And there are lots of examples of it being used for things that it shouldn't be used for, which, is not unique to AI, even if the illustrations are so clear with AI. If we let go of this idea that AI is like, the talking robot, and instead say it is a type of technology that allows for really big data sets to be analyzed in ways that it would take years and years and years for humans to do it. Okay, that like really shifts things, right? Very few instances, if any, that I need a talking robot in my work, but lots of places where I could think, oh yeah, we have a ton of, registration data from 20 years of the conference. If I could plug those into something and have it tell me, oh, here's a better kind of analysis of when to expect the peaks in registration, cool, right? It gave me what I needed, which was the analysis, and now it's all done, right? Thank you so much, power off. I'm gonna go make human decisions based on this information, right? So I think the best uses for AI are not allowing the technology to make decisions, but enabling humans to make decisions that they couldn't have been able to have insight into before, because they can get the numbers crunched, they can get the analysis done, they can even, find where there's information that they didn't realize before because it wasn't being analyzed at such a large scale. And then it is powered off. It is all done, right? Thank you. We'll turn you back on when we need you. And we even have an example of this in the book because it is such a clear, you're all done here with your part, where John Jay College had massive amounts of data to figure out. There's tons of resources committed to making sure that freshmen finish their first year, because if you finish your first year, you're much more likely, to finish college. Right. But then they discovered, but then we have all of these people who are 3/4 of the way to finishing and they never finish.
Oh.
So let's use AI to analyze the data and see if it can anticipate if a student is maybe about to fall into that, into that number. And it took them 24 different AI algorithms to get there. So again, this isn't your first try, great, you got it. You really need to finesse how the tool works. After 24 different setups, they found one that really helped identify, okay, these are, students who have that potential to maybe drop out at the very end. Okay, thank you for the list, power down, you're all done. And so then the staff at the university were using that to say, okay, great, here's the short list of potential folks. Here's our short list of resources that make sense for people at this stage. Let's go intervene. And in 2 years, they graduated 900 additional students.
Wow.
Because they were able to do the human piece so much more effectively. They knew who to reach out to. They knew which resources were available. The AI didn't do it. It wasn't sending, an automated message. Hey, Jay, we think that you're at risk. Please sign up for this resource, right? Like the AI wasn't making the decision about which resource for which person. It wasn't making decisions at all. It did its job, highlighted people, evaluated the data. It went away. And then staff felt like they could really do their job. They were really helping people. More people graduated, there is a place for a tool that can analyze lots of data. Its place is not making decisions, interacting with community, doing those things. That's for humans to do.
Right. Now, I know that you're going to be rotating off here in a second, but I would love to hear about what you're about to do. You're entering into a fellowship. Are you going to be exploring some of these issues? What's that all about?
Yeah, I'm going to spend the summer in Berlin at the Robert Bosch Academy, having the huge gift of time. I might even read a book, I really cannot wait. And I'm, going to be diving into these issues, especially around this kind of slippery and ephemeral idea of what our sovereignty is on the internet, and how do we as people have rights over our data and our content and our use and our access. And what does that mean in a world where we don't own the internet? And what is the internet that we could make together with that as a value?
That's a big one.
So
I know
reach out if you have any answers,
No, but I'd love to enter some questions.
Yes.
So if people want to learn more about N10 or about that work, what's the best way of finding out more about all the above?
Yeah, you can go to N10, which is nten.org, anytime, and go under the Connect tab, and you can find those online community groups. Again, totally free. Anybody can use those and engage there. And we have all different resources across the website. And you can email me anytime. It's Amy, AMY, @n10.org. Staff emails are all on the website. But yeah, just reach out. I would love to hear from you. And like I said, if you have answers, but more than likely, if you have questions, let's talk about them. Thank
you so much for this, Amy. Really do appreciate it. All of it. And really looking forward to seeing what you come back with. This whole idea about sovereignty is it's everything you talked about with Facebook. It's everything you talked about going back to setting up systems internally in our organizations. Who owns the data? Who are we in the midst of all this? And it's really up to us. It's not about
who are we? Yes.
Who are we? Thank you
so much, Jay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.